Today on Star Trek Revisited, we're checking out the Season 1 TOS episode, A Taste of Armageddon. Let's get straight into it. Okay, we start, as is often the case, with a captain's log, started 3192.1, with the Enterprise en route to, very precisely, Star Cluster NGC 321. They are looking to open diplomatic relations with the civilizations that are known to be there. And they've sent a message to Emenia 7, which is the principal planet of the star cluster. We're on the bridge, and Kirk is hovering around the science station with Spock. Behind him is Uhura, and Lieutenant Brent, one of our favorite extras, is standing alongside Uhura there. And as Kirk concludes his log, saying that they are awaiting an answer for their message, which states their friendly intentions, he asks Uhura for an update and says, "Nothing yet, Lieutenant," and she responds, "No, nothing just yet, but all hailing frequencies are open," as Kirk walks across to the engineering station where Scotty is there, and he takes a report from Yeoman of the Week, which is Yeoman Tamala, who I really like, actually. I think she's really cool in this episode. Onto the bridge comes our antagonist, if you like. This is Federation Ambassador, Special Ambassador Robert Fox, who is here to work on the negotiations to establish a treaty port in this sector. He's very, very all business and doesn't come across as very nice. And he wants to know if Kirk has received an answer to the message yet. And Kirk relays what Uhura has just said to him, that there's nothing yet. We're awaiting a reply. And today is the first time that they've had any evidence that they've picked up their signal, indeed. But timing could not be better, because Uhura gets Kirk's attention and says, "Captain, there's a message coming in from," and I love the way she says this, she says E-Mini-R 7. Really cool, because Kirk and everyone else who calls the planet by its name just says Emenia 7. But I love the way Uhura emphasizes the E-Mini-R 7. But with a concerned look on her face, she relays to Kirk, "Sir, it's code 710. And Kirk says, "Are you sure?" Uhura says, "Yes, positive." It repeats over and over again. And the very officious and pompous Ambassador Fox, with his very odd collar on his jacket, that's, wow, quite impressive. He says, "Is that supposed to mean something?" And Kirk informs him that code 710 means that under no circumstances are they to approach that planet. No circumstances whatsoever. And Fox interjects with his first annoying overrule, and he says, "You will disregard that signal, Captain." Kirk replies, "Mr. Fox, it is their planet." And Fox says to him, "Well, Captain, in the last 20 years, thousands of lives have been lost in this quadrant that could have been saved if we've had a treaty port here. We mean to have that port, and I'm here to get it." This guy's all business, and as I said, he's not very nice with it. Kirk tries to object and says, "By disregarding code 710, you might well involve us in an interplanetary war." Fox says, "I'm quite prepared to take that risk." And Kirk again objects and says, "You are? I'm thinking about this ship, my crew." But Fox is not budging on this. He says, "I've my orders, Captain, and now you have yours. You will proceed on course, achieve orbit status, and just leave the rest to me. You're well aware that my mission gives me the power of command. I now exercise it." And the bridge crew is looking around, concerned at this quite embarrassing exchange of this petty little ambassador ordering their captain around. And he goes on, "You'll proceed on course. That's a direct order." And he marches off the bridge in a very pompous fashion indeed. And Spock comes over and converses with Kirk and says, "In view of code 710, Captain, may I suggest?" And Kirk cuts him off and says, "Yes, Mr. Spock, I know. And he addresses the whole ship and says, "This is the captain. Condition yellow alert. Phaser crews stand by. Deflector shields up. We're going in. Peacefully, I hope, but peacefully or not, we are going in." Now, something I really don't like about this, in terms of the character of Kirk, and the Kirk that we've already come to know, and the Kirk that we'll all get to know even more throughout the further 2 seasons of Star Trek, is he's walked all over a bit here. More so than you would expect him to allow himself to be. When it comes to the safety of his ship and his crew, I would expect him to push back a lot more on this and exercise his personal authority as captain of the Enterprise, which we will see him do many, many times in the future. Happily, we will see Scotty later on in this episode exercise that exact control and authority, something I really think Kirk should have done here. But if he had, we wouldn't have had an episode. So it's a plot device, and I get it. But that's our teaser done. We go into the opening credits and into the episode, and we see its title, A Taste of Armageddon, with a beautiful remastered Enterprise orbiting a very Earth-like looking planet, nice blues and greens going on there with some cloud cover. I really like this shot of the Enterprise over this planet, the remastered effects looking glorious as ever. We get another captain's log from Kirk here explaining that they're now in standard orbit around planet Emenia 7. Kirk says, "My orders are clear. We must establish diplomatic relations at all cost, and we're preparing to beam down to the planet's surface." Spock then says, "We know very little about them other than their civilization is advanced. They've had space flight for several centuries but never ventured beyond their own solar system. When we first contacted them more than 50 years ago, Emenia 7 was at war with its nearest neighbor. And the Earth expedition making the report failed to return. This should be a massive red flag already. That particular vessel was the USS Valiant, listed as missing in space." Little fun fact here, this is the second time we've had a Valiant that has gone missing, and the first time was the SS Valiant in the second pilot, where no man has gone before. So ships named Valiant don't seem to fare well. That one was also listed as missing at the galactic barrier, and we know what happened there. Ambassador Pompous Fox marches onto the bridge with his collar protruding in incredible fashion, and he's belligerent as ever. "Kirk, what's this about you going down alone?" And Kirk says, "Mr. Ambassador, I'm taking some security precautions. That is my prerogative. I can't risk you beaming down there until I know what kind of a reception we're going to get. Your safety is my responsibility, and those are my orders, sir." So it's nice to see Kirk at least sticking up for himself a little bit. It's then revealed at this point that we should have been visible to the sensing devices of Emenia 7 for quite some time, but they've taken no notice of us at all. They did scan us when we assumed orbit, but no apparent interest. Kirk inquires about the Enterprise's defenses at this point. Spock relays that the screens are down, but all defensive details are on general alert status, Captain. Kirk then goes over to Scotty and says, "The ship is yours," and Scotty wishes him a bonny trip in his distinctive Scottish brogue. I do love Scotty. And we cut to the next scene, and we see a lovely remastered shot of Emenia 7, lovely blue skies, lovely city center complexes, and some green grass around there. And we see a party coming to greet the landing party. This consists of two guards in some very interesting costumes with some amusing hats. We've got some very incredible fashion going on in this episode with Ambassador Fox and these guards, and some lovely fashion for the incredibly lovely and beautiful Barbara Babcock, who is playing on this occasion Maya 3. Now, Barbara Babcock is almost Star Trek royalty because we've heard her voice already in one episode. She was the voice of Trelane's mother in The Squire of Gothos, and this would be one of two on-screen appearances for her, the other being in season 3 in an episode that I don't care so much for, which is Plato's Stepchildren. And she would have other voiced appearances as well in Star Trek, but I really like her. I think she's a really, really striking actress, really, really beautiful, and really, really good actress as well. I love what she's wearing here. It's a wonderful costume, and we'll review more of her credits at the end as we go into our IMDb section. So she gives some instructions to the guards here. She says, "Remember your instructions. They are to be treated correctly, nothing more. As our landing party consisting of Kirk, Spock, Yom and Tamala, and recurring security guard Lieutenant Galloway, played by David Ross, and Lieutenant Osborne, who I don't believe we've seen before. I'm wondering, did Eddie Paskey have the week off here and wasn't available to join his good buddy Galloway? Anyway, they arrive. They are greeted apparently warmly by Mayor 3 and the guards. They introduce themselves. I'm Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, and she introduces herself as Mayor 3, and she congratulates them on their instrumentation because they've come exactly where they need to be, at the center of control. They escort them through the corridors, and Mayor stops them and says, "Captain, you were warned not to come here." Kirk protests, "I had orders to come here. Why did your people tell us to stay away?" And Mayor relays that it was for your own safety, Captain. Kirk says, "I see no danger here." And Mayor then says, "Nevertheless, you are here, and it would be morally incorrect to do less than extend our hospitality. Anan 7 and the members of the High Council await you." And it's interesting to me that everyone on this planet has a name and a number after their name. That's pretty interesting. She escorts them to the council chamber. In they go, and there's a very important group of men sat around. Note that these are all men, so this is very reflective of the time of filming this episode, the 60s, where females were not typically seen in more prominent positions as a general rule yet, so a very male-influenced leadership panel here. Sitting in the middle is Anan 7, and he greets them warmly enough, but there's definitely a tension in the air, and he says, "I am Anan 7, welcome to Armenia, and what can we do for you?" Kirk goes on to say that my mission is to establish diplomatic relationship between yourselves and the Federation. Anan says that is quite impossible because of the war. And Kirk says, "War? There's no sign of war here." And Anan goes on to say and reinforce, "We've been at war for 500 years. Kirk says, quite accurately, "You conceal it very, very well." Spock adds that there's no evidence this at all. The planet seems prosperous and peaceful. Anan informs them that casualties among the civilian population total from 1 to 3 million dead each year from direct enemy attack. "Captain, we told you to stay away, and as long as your ship is orbiting our planet, it is in severe danger." Spock then asks, "With whom are you at war?" Anan informs them the third planet in our system, called Vendikar, which was originally settled by our people, but they are now a ruthless enemy. And at this point, some beeping occurs and a door opens to reveal computer center, which looks like a war room. Anan excuses himself and says Vendikar is attacking. Kirk, who is left standing with Mayor 3, inquires, "Well, don't you take shelter?" And she says, "There is no shelter, Captain." Kirk looks at Mr. Spock, equally confused, and says, "Do you hear any explosions?" Spock says, "No." And he asks Guillaume Tamala to take tricorder readings to see if there's any radiation disturbances of any kind. And she says, "Nothing, sir, no evidence." Kirk then asks Mayor, "What kind of weapons are the enemy using?" And she says, "Fusion bombs, materialized by the enemy over their targets." This is extremely confusing to Kirk and party, as there is no evidence of any sort of disruption on the surface around them. He calls up to the Enterprise, to Scotty, and says, "Are scanners operative on the planet surface? Any indication of any trouble?" And Scotty says, "Nothing, sir, all quiet." And Kirk ends the transmission. Meanwhile, Anan 7 and his assistant, who I believe is called SAR 6, notice an explosion, a big one. And he says, "Anan, look." And he says, "Yes, just as this happened 50 years ago. Alert a security detachment, they may be needed." And the attack comes to a conclusion. And Anan comes back over to Kirk and party. And he relays that it was a vicious attack, extremely destructive, but our casualties are high, very, very high. And Kirk says, "I've been in contact with my ship. There's been no attack, no explosions, no radiations. Is this some sort of game you're playing?" And Anan assures them that this is no game. 500,000 people have just been killed. He then instructs SAR 6 to activate the attack units and to launch an immediate counter-attack. Spock then gets the idea of what's going on. And this to me is a bit of a red flag of Spock's usual instinctive capabilities. He should have got this much, much earlier, but he's now realized computers, Captain. They fight their war with computers. And Anan says, "Yes, of course. Computers don't kill 500,000 people, though," says Kirk. And Anan says, "But the deaths have been registered, and those people have 24 hours to report to our disintegration machines. You got to understand, Captain, that under ordinary conditions, no civilization could withstand a war of over 500 years, but we have reached a solution. And Spock says, well, then the attack by Vendikar was theoretical. He says, no, quite real. An attack is mathematically launched. I lost my wife in the last attack. Our civilization lives, but the people die. But our culture goes on. And Kirk, appalled at this point, says, you mean to tell me that your people just walk willingly into a disintegration machine? And Anand says, we have a very high consciousness of duty, Captain. And Spock pipes in and says, there is a certain scientific logic about it. Anand says, I'm glad you approve. Spock says, I do not approve, but I understand. And at this point, Anand says, then you will recall that I warned you not to come here. I'm sorry, but it has happened. And Kirk says, what happened? And Anand says, once your vessel entered orbit of our planet, it became a legitimate target, and it has been classified destroyed by a tricobalt satellite explosion. Anand then gestures to the guards, and then he says, all persons aboard your ship now have 24 hours to report to our disintegration machines. At this point, our vigilant and diligent security guards, Osborne and Galloway, start reaching for their phasers, but Kirk gives them a little shake of the head saying, no, don't do this, at least not yet. Anand goes on, in order to ensure the cooperation of those aboard your ship, I've ordered you, Captain, and your party held in custody here until they surrender. And in come more guards, and it's this point that Kirk tries to make a grab for his communicator, but it's to no avail. The guards have already drawn their weapons and prevented them from doing so. Anand goes on to say, if possible, we shall spare your ship, Captain, but its passengers and crew are already dead. So that's end of scene, and then we get another captain's log where Kirk updates that the Enterprise in orbit about Ameniar 7 has been declared a casualty of an incredible war fought by computers. And we now see that Kirk and his party are quite comfortable but detained in a room. And Kirk goes on to say in his log that I and my landing party, though apparently not included as casualties aboard the Enterprise, are confined on the planet's surface. And at this point, the lovely Maya 3, you can probably tell I'm quite taken by Barbara Babcock. I've always found her very, very lovely. She enters the room, and a little fact about her, actually, well, a personal fact, I guess, in that for some reason, I'd always thought or assumed that her character was actually Anan 7's daughter, but that's never mentioned here, so that's something that I've got into my head for some reason, and I don't quite know why, but she's clearly, well, she may be his daughter, but she's an official, but never mentioned specifically to be his daughter. But anyway, in she comes, and she says, I've been sent to ask you if you require anything, and Kirk says, we require a great deal. I wish to speak to Anan 7. And she says, he's busy coordinating casualty lists. Kirk gets a little bit threatening here and says he'll have more casualty lists than he knows what to do with if he doesn't get in here and talk to me. Mia protests and says, don't you understand our duty now? And Kirk cuts her off and says, your duty doesn't include stepping into a disintegrator machine. But she says, I'm afraid mine does, Captain. I too have been declared a casualty. I must report to a disintegrator by noon tomorrow. And Kirk says, is that all it means to you, to report and die? She says, my life is as dear to me as yours is to you, Captain. But if I refuse to report and others refuse to report, then Vendikar would have no choice but to retaliate with real weapons. And surely you can see that ours is the better way. Kirk says, I don't see that at all. But it's to no avail. He can't get through to her. She asks him one more time as she leaves the room, is there anything more I can bring for you? And he says, yes, Anan 7. We cut to the Enterprise and we see Scotty in command of the bridge. I'm trying to recall all the episodes we've seen so far. This may be the first time we've seen Scotty in command of the bridge. I could be wrong from memory, but I think it is. And I like this. I like seeing Scotty in command. And if it is the first time, it's the first of many times that we will see Scotty rightly left in charge when Kirk and Spock are not aboard. Scotty, though technically never stated to be second officer, is in practical terms exactly that, because Kirk is the captain, Spock is second in command. After that, Scotty is the ranking officer and will always take command. Except on situations where his character doesn't appear in the episode. For example, Arena. Scotty may have been in the transporter room, but for some reason Sulu took command of the bridge on that occasion. Interesting. The captain, I think, has the prerogative to leave anyone in command of the ship, to be honest, though. But that's another thing. Chain of command. Interesting to me. Anyway, McCoy is on the bridge and he says, I tell you, we should have heard something by now. And Scotty acknowledges, yeah, you're right, Doctor, but what would you have me do? What can I do? Would you have me open fire? And McCoy says, of course not. At this point, Uhura signals over to Scotty from her station. Uhura's looking lovely in this episode. Our female people in this episode are looking absolutely wonderful, I have to say. But she says, message coming in from Emini R7, and Scotty is relieved, and he hears over the tannoy the voice of what sounds like Kirk. And he says, good news, Mr. Scott, the Armenians have agreed to the establishment of full diplomatic relations. Scotty says, Mr. Fox will be glad to hear about that. Then Kirk says they've also extended an invitation for all personnel to come ashore for shore leave, and you can be assured of a wonderful time. Scotty immediately becomes suspicious of this and says, all personnel? And the voice says, all personnel. And we cut down at the planet and we see that it's actually an ARN-7, somehow using Kirk's communicator and some sort of voice-generated technology to sound like Kirk. And he goes on to say, we'll transport up trained Armenians to assume support positions. Those are my orders, Mr. Scott. Scotty doesn't argue here, but it's clear he's suspicious. He says, I say I'll start forming shore parties immediately. And he ends the transmission. And he says to McCoy, well, what do you think of that? McCoy says, I'm not sure. And Scotty says, well, I'm sure. And he walks over to the science station and he says to the computer, last message received and recorded from Captain Kirk, analyze it. And the computer confirms what Scotty suspects, that there's a 98% probability that this is a fake. This is not Captain Kirk's voice. And Scotty says, well, Doctor, they've got them. And now they're trying to get us. We cut back down to the planet's surface, back into the room where our party is being confined, and Kirk is saying to Spock, are you sure you can do this, Mr. Spock? And Spock says, yes, limited telepathic abilities are inherent in Vulcanians, Captain. There's that mention of Vulcanians again, which may be the last time we hear it. We'll see. We're coming to the end of season 1 quite rapidly now. This may or may not be the last time we hear that turn. But what he's going to do here is he's going to try and use his telepathic abilities, a form of mind meld, I guess, if you will, to place his hand on the wall and communicate telepathically with the guard outside. And we see this guard standing outside as Spock starts trying to do this. And the guard becomes troubled. He's clearly sort of shaking his head and closing his eyes as if something is reaching him. And Spock signals to Kirk and the rest of the team that this is working, and he expects the guard to enter the room in a moment, and this he does. He takes out this little tool which opens the door, which is quite interesting. He opens the door and Kirk goes into Kirk fight mode and he chops him, and it's really cool. I love how much Shatner does his own stuff in these episodes. He's really not afraid to get stuck in, is he? And they incapacitate this guard very, very easily. The door closes and they take control of him and the device which is used to open the door. Kirk thanks Spock and he takes the guard's weapon, and Yeoman Tamala then asks, well, what do we do next? And Kirk says, well, we get our communicators back and try and contact the ship. Kirk then says to Spock, Mr. Spock, we'll need more weapons. And Spock says, I understand. Kirk says, we'll try and take it easy, but if we're forced to kill. And Spock looks uncomfortable at this. And this is a sign that Spock is very, very much a pacifist, somebody who is dedicated to peace. But he acknowledges the need that may arise here. Kirk uses the tool, again from the guard, to open the door, and out they go into the corridor. And this is a beautiful set that we have here, I have to comment. Lovely lighting. We've got some lovely purples and greens and oranges which are being cast onto the wall, because I don't think the walls are actually this color. I think the walls are actually grey. But the lighting and the camera work here, I have to give big kudos to, because it's really, really beautiful. I'm loving the color palette that we see on this episode. They carefully go out and the guard walks past and they take cover to hide. It's quite an amusing shot, the way that Yeoman Tamala basically buries her head in behind Spock's arm. It's almost as if it's one of those situations as a child where you hide behind a cushion and think, oh, if I can't see them, they can't see me. It just amused me greatly the way she hid there. They walk around the corridors and they see what is clearly a disintegration machine, and a guard and a technician operating this, and people reporting for their deaths, basically. And in goes this lady, the door closes, and it turns around, it opens up again, and she's gone. And another guard, he's obviously been chosen to die as well in this attack by computer, he steps in as well, and boom, then he's gone. And Spock relays to Kirk that they go in, Captain, one entrance, but no exit. They go in, but they don't come out. This is a disintegration machine. And they start moving forward, and wouldn't you know it, what a coincidence, Maya 3 arrives, reporting for her death. Kirk grabs her by the arm, and she's shocked. And he says to her, Maya, what are you doing? And she points over and he says, "You're not going in there." And she protests, "But I must." He says, "No, you're not." And at this point, he notices that a guard has a sidearm and he instructs Spock to go over and calmly get it. And this is what Spock does. He calmly walks up as Kirk is watching. And this is so amusing. He just presently walks up to this guard front on and says, "Sir, there's a multi-legged creature crawling on your shoulder." And the guy walks right into it, or he looks right into it as he turns his head to look at his shoulder, and wouldn't you know it, Spock does the Vulcan nerve pinch, takes the weapon, walks back. Then Kirk says, "Right, now everyone clear out of the way," and raises his weapon and he destroys the disintegration chamber. Maya is very, very upset. She says, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then Kirk says, throwing a monkey wrench into the machinery. And she says, "You can't do this." He says, "I've done it." We go to the council chamber, where the council is just sitting around. And a voice comes on saying, "The Federation prisoners have escaped. Disintegration station number 12 has been destroyed, Councilman." Anan issues orders to find the Federation party and, if they resist, do what is necessary. And we cut to the corridor where the disintegration machine has been destroyed and is in flames now. There's chaos. And Anan issues another command saying, "Calculate the orbit of the Star Cruiser now circling the planet. And stand by to fire, full power, destroy the Star Cruiser." And we got to said Star Cruiser, or more accurately, the Federation Starship Enterprise in orbit. And we got a ship's log, which is being done by Scotty on this occasion. And he relays the concerns that they have, that their party is on the surface of Eminiar 7, and they can't contact them, and they have suspicions about what's going on down there, and there's been a false message. At helm duty today is Lieutenant DePaul, who we previously saw in Arena. He's got a slightly different hairstyle today. His hair is swooped down instead of slicked back. He looks less like Captain Christopher Pike than he did recently, and you'll recall that this is the actor who played Captain Christopher Pike in the two-part Menagerie, the disabled Captain Pike, that is, heavily made up. And he does, as we said at that time, bear a strong resemblance to the late Jeffrey Hunter, who played Captain Pike in the pilot episode. But this is the second last appearance of DePaul, played by Sean Kenny, his last of 2 appearances. And he's going through some readouts of what's going on, deflector screens rigged at full power, nothing to worry about. And then he says, "Correction, Mr. Scott." And then Scotty comes over to him, and there's a barrage. They're under attack. And Scotty says, "They're taking pot shots at us." "Status, Mr. DePaul?" He says, "Screens firm, sir." So these weapons are not having any effect on their screens. And DePaul says that these are extremely powerful sonic vibrations, and if those screens weren't up. So they're okay, there's been no damage done. And they discuss what they can do to retaliate. What can they do? And says, well, what would we do? Where would we concentrate any retaliation on? That's a big planet. And McCoy says, "Not too big to the Enterprise to handle if it has to." And Scotty says, "Well, we can't fire full phases with our screens up, but I could treat them to a few dozen photon torpedoes." And just at this point, our pompous little Ambassador Foxy with his collar enters the bridge. And he says, "You'll do no such thing, Mr. Scott." And Scotty says, "Mr. Fox, we're under attack." And we got a lovely wide shot of the bridge here. And next to DePaul, we've got Lieutenant Hadley on navigation duty, where we would often see him throughout the course of the series. And Fox, with his diplomatic head on, says, "Obviously it's a misunderstanding." But Scotty says, "I'm responsible for the safety of this ship." Fox says, "I'm responsible for the success of this mission, and that's more important than this ship." Is it really now, Foxy? My goodness. 430 lives? That's a big statement to make. Fox says, "I'll try to make contact with the planet's officials." And he turns to Uhura and says, "Lieutenant, open up a channel and keep it open." Scotty nods at her because she's not going to do it without Scotty's approval, which I do like. I like that she goes through the chain of command here, and he doesn't have the right to give her that order. But Scotty nods and says, "Yeah, just do it." And he leaves the bridge. And Scotty says, "Diplomats. The best diplomat I know is a fully charged phaser bank." We're back on the planet's surface, and we see Kirk and party with Maya 3 in their custody now. They go back to the room where they were being held captive, and it's pretty cool, actually. She says, "Captain, why have we come back here?" He says, "Well, they're never going to think to look at us from the room we escaped from." And it's pretty smart thinking there. Maya protests and says, "Captain, you've got to let me go." Kirk's not having any of it. And he says, "Mr. Spock, how do we work out from that little raid we just did?" And they've done quite well for themselves, actually. We captured 4 of their disruptor-type weapons, communication device, and 2 full outfits of male clothing. So they have the ability, hopefully, to contact the Enterprise with this communicator with a bit of modification. Kirk says to Maya, I want to put a stop to this, and with your help, maybe I can do it. But if you don't help me, we'll all die, and the killing will go on and on and on. Back in the council chamber, Anan is talking with his colleagues, saying time is running out. We've already fallen behind with our killing quota. Star 6 walks in and says, on the central channel, Anan, the Federation ambassador is communicating, wishes to speak with you. And Anan has a bit of a moral dilemma here. He ponders, what's the best course of action here? Open honesty or a deception which may well save our lives? And they prepare for the communication. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Uhura says, a channel is open, Mr. Ambassador. You'll be speaking to Anan 7, who is head of the High Council of the Emenian Union. And Foxy says, Mr. Anan, this is Robert Fox, Special Ambassador for the United Federation of Planets. And Anan greets him warmly over the channel and says, an honor, Ambassador. And Ambassador Fox says, we have approached you openly with the intent of establishing formal and friendly relations with your planet, but for some reason you have attacked us. And I hear you're holding our captain and his party on the planet. And Anan reassures him, a mistake, Mr. Ambassador. An error in our sensors indicated that your ship was about to attack us. You have my sacred word as an Emenian that they will not be harmed, and you will be greeted warmly on the planet's surface. Despite this, despite the fact that the attack has been stopped, as ordered by Anan, Scotty says maintain status, Mr. DePaul, as DePaul informs him that the barrage is now stopped. Anan over the channel continues and says, we are most anxious to establish relations with you, Mr. Fox. We'll make arrangements to receive you. And then he says, the minute that their screens are down, open fire. Foxy then says to Anan, I presume your ship's captain will be on hand when we beam down? And Anan says, he'll be there, sir, you've got my word. And Foxy looks very, very pompous and pleased with himself here. He says, diplomacy, gentlemen, should be a job left to diplomats. And he then says to Scotty, you will, of course, immediately resume a peaceful status. And this is possibly my favorite scene in the whole episode. I bloody love Scotty here, and that he's in command, and he says, no, sir, I will not. I'll not lower the screens, not until the captain tells me to. And Fox tries to protest and says, you're taking orders from me. And Scotty says, I know about your authority, but the screens stay up. And I like how McCoy chips in here. He's supporting Scotty all the way in this. He says, Mr. Fox, they faked a message from the captain. They've launched an attack against our ship. Now you want us to trust them openly? And Fox goes on, I expect you and want you to obey my lawful orders. And Scotty's not budging an inch. I love this. No, sir, I won't lower the screens. And Fox is furious as your refusal to comply with my orders has endangered the entire success of this mission. I could have you sent to a penal colony for this. And Scotty's resolute at that. You can, sir, but I won't lower the screens. This is wonderful, superb acting by the late, great Jimmy Doohan. And I love the way Scotty is in total command here, as he should be, as Kirk should have been at the start of the episode, by putting the safety of the Enterprise first, not disobeying regulations, and exerting that personal authority as commander of the Enterprise. And right now, right here, Scotty is the commander of the Enterprise in the absence of Spock and Kirk. Fox leaves the bridge and says, your name will figure prominently in my report. And off he goes. Scotty and McCoy say, well, the Haggis is in the fire for sure now, but I won't risk this ship on the word of that mealy-mouthed gentleman down below, referring to Anan 7. It's hard to tell who he's talking about, Anan 7 or or Ambassador Fox here, to be honest. Anyway, we cut down to the surface, and Anan is in his private quarters taking a little sip of a drink, and Kirk sneaks up behind him. Obviously, Kirk has decided to go alone and find his way to Anan's quarters. Mayor has obviously helped to guide him there. He's not very well protected, considering he's the leader of the High Council of this planet. But Anan realizes him there, and he says, won't you join me for a drink, Captain? Without even turning around, he knows that it's him, and he knows that he's there. And he says, you'll find our trover most interesting, which is obviously the drink of choice on this planet. Kirk says, I didn't come here to drink. Anan lays into him and says, you're a barbarian. You destroyed disintegration chamber number 12. And he gets to the point after that brief exchange about Kirk's barbarism and the fact that they are also a barbarous species. And he says, what do you want, Captain? Kirk says, I want to contact my ship. Where are my communicators? Anan says, you're worried about your ship, Captain. I'm trying to save a world. Kirk is a bit aggressive here, and he puts his arm against Anan's neck and says, I'd be thinking about saving my life if I were you. And at this point, Kirk turns his back on him. I don't know if Kirk does this intentionally or not, because he allows Anan a moment to press an alert button, which will bring security to his quarters. And Kirk takes a drink with him. And they have a little back and forth and says, we don't make war with computers, Mr. Councilman, and we don't herd the casualties into suicide stations. We make the real thing. I could destroy this planet. And Anand says, why do you think I don't let you talk to your ship? And then he says, what would you do if I told you where those communicators were? Would you just walk right out and get them? And Kirk says, something like that. And Kirk's prepared for the trap that Anand is obviously trying to spring for him. And Kirk goes to the door, with Anand having said they're down in the council chamber, go left, then left, at the end of the corridor, you'll find them, unguarded. But Kirk sort of beckons Anand to him and then opens the door and throws him into the waiting guards. And he has a bit of a scuffle, puts up a good fight, but eventually the guards get the better of Kirk, and his plan has gone a bit wrong here, to be honest. Anand orders Kirk taken to the council chamber, and he acknowledges that it's a pity that he's still alive. A man like that would have preferred to die fighting. Meanwhile, in orbit of the planet, a lovely shot of the Enterprise as somehow Ambassador Fox and his assistant, who we're seeing for the first time, beam down. Now, Scotty absolutely refused to lower the screens, and the planet could not fire on the Enterprise without the screens lowered down. And unless I'm mistaking my Star Trek lore and science, you cannot beam down or up with screens raised. So I'm not quite sure how this has worked, but if any of you know, let me know in the comments. But I don't understand this, and I never did about this episode. But Foxy and Assistant are greeted by Anand 7 and SAR 6, and it's a warm welcome, or so it seems. He says, Ambassador, follow me, and he takes him inside, some guards waiting, and once he's got the guards in position, he says, Ambassador, I'm truly sorry for what must happen now. And Foxy's all, I beg your pardon, all diplomatic. He says, you've been registered casualties, you will be taken immediately to disintegration chamber, so your deaths can be registered. And he's so matter-of-fact about it, and Foxy's like, you mean we are to be killed? That is correct, Ambassador. I'm very sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it. And Foxy and his assistant are herded off by the two guards. Meanwhile, back in the room, Galloway and Osborne have changed out of uniform into the Armenian Guard uniforms. Mia is still being held there, with Yeoman Tamala holding one of the weapons. Spock is modifying the Armenian communicator and manages to contact the Enterprise. Scotty's relieved to hear from Spock, and he says, under no circumstances should anybody beam down, they'd be killed immediately. And Scotty says, that ties it. That Popinjay Fox went down a couple of minutes ago. I love the description of Fox as a Popinjay. It's such a great word. Makes me think of Monty Burns from The Simpsons. It's the sort of word I'm sure that he's used on many occasions. Love Mr. Burns. Anyway, Spock then says, orbit out to maximum phaser range and wait further instructions. Yeoman Tamala then says, what are we going to do, Mr. Spock? And Spock says, I'm going to find the ambassador and the captain, because the captain is overdue, as Spock had previously relayed to Scotty on the communication. He's going to take the guards with him and leave Yeoman Tamala in charge of Maya 3. He says, in fact, you stay here and prevent this young lady from immolating herself. Knock her down and sit on her if necessary. And Maya 3 looks most indignant at this suggestion of being knocked down and sat upon by Yeoman Tamala. Do what you must to protect yourself. Clear? And Yeoman Tamala says, very clear, sir. And they all leave, and she stands guard over Maya 3, and Yeoman Tamala looks all business, and you wouldn't want to mess with her. She's got a very stern look on her face. Anyway, we cut back to Foxy and Assistant being marched to the disintegration machine, and Foxy's protesting, I'm a representative of the United Federation of Planets, a special representative, as if the word special is going to make any difference. Spock comes along, and there's a little bit of a ruse going on here. Galloway and Osborne in the Armenian uniforms look like they're marching Spock to be disintegrated, and Galloway actually pushes Spock along and says, get in line. And it's a great little act, actually. And they catch them by surprise. They knock out the guards, and Foxy realizes it's Spock. He says, Mr. Spock. And Spock says, please, Mr. Fox, stand by from the chamber or you may be injured, or stand back from the chamber or you may be injured. And he destroys another disintegration machine. As Foxy asks him, what are you doing? And Spock says, practicing a peculiar variety of diplomacy, sir, as the machine is destroyed. Spock then inquires about Captain Kirk, and Fox says, they have him, the guards told us. And Spock says, by now, Mr. Ambassador, I'm sure you realize that diplomacy is ineffective here. And Fox says, I've never been a soldier, Mr. Spock, but I learned quickly. And off they go together walking through the corridors to try and find Kirk, who is now being held in the council chamber. And Anan says to him, "Captain, surely you see the logic of our situation, the desperation of our situation. We have an agreement with Vendikar, and we are behind on our quota, and we are at risk of antagonizing them and leading to a real war." And Kirk quite rightly says, "My people are not responsible for your agreements." Well, quite rightly in a sense, but they are bound by the Prime Directive. And once they were in their jurisdiction, by the letter of the law of the Prime Directive, Kirk actually should have turned the people on his ship over to Anan 7 and allowed them to be disintegrated. After which point, what would have happened? I mean, Kirk and the landing party were not casualties. They probably would have been allowed to return to the Enterprise, and off they go. Only 5 of them. They would have needed an automation center in place to control the Enterprise with just 5 of them, as they did in Star Trek 3. But that's another story in a parallel universe where Kirk obeyed the Prime Directive and let his whole crew be killed. But anyway, my people are not responsible for your agreements, but in fact, they probably are and should be. And Anan says, "You will be responsible for an escalation. Are those 500 people of yours up there more important than the lives of millions on Amenia and Vendikar?" And it's not 500, by the way, it's 430. But to be fair, how would Anan 7 know that? Anan then says, "Open a channel to the Enterprise," and the channel is opened, and Kirk takes the opportunity to jump up and issue a quick command to Scotty, which was, "Scotty, General Order 24 in 2 hours, in 2 hours!" And he looks very, very satisfied with himself that he's got this order out. And Anan then starts to address Scotty over the intercom and says, "This is Anan 7, we hold your captain, his party, and the ambassador and his party, and you've got 30 minutes to beam down to the planet and report, otherwise they will be killed." And Kirk, after the transmission ends, explains to Anan, "All that it means is that I won't be around to see it. You heard me give General Order 24. That means that in 2 hours the Enterprise will destroy Emenia 7. Now this is massive. I cannot believe that a utopian society like the United Federation of Planets would have a general order that enables a captain of a starship, one man, to issue an order to destroy an entire planet. I mean, it's an interesting plot device. And when I was a kid watching this episode, I was like, get in. Yeah, I was so thrilled that Kirk had got the upper hand here and got the better of Anan here, and with this threat of destroying them if they didn't release them. And but from my elder perspective, I'm more thoughtful about it now. I'm like, wow, he really had that power, and what a dystopian idea. In realizing that this is a thing, though, General Order 24, Anan panics, and even though it'll be futile with their screens up, he says, "Open fire on the Enterprise," but the message comes back that we cannot. The target has moved out of range, and indeed Spock had ordered this. He said, "Orbit out to maximum phaser range." And Anan, with a panic on his face, says, "You wouldn't do this. Hundreds of millions of people." And Kirk says, "I didn't start it, Councilman, but I'm liable to finish it." As we cut to the corridors where there's firefighting going on, the guards trying to recapture Spock and his party, but they get the better of the guards, but they take one casualty. Foxy's assistant goes down, and it's unclear whether he's wounded or dead, but Foxy abandons him rather easily here. He just takes a look at him and says, "Oh, well, can't do anything," and he just walks off. We cut back to the council room, and SAR 6 comes in and saying, "We've received a message from Vendikar. They accuse us of reneging on the treaty." And there's a message comes through saying, "Earth party reported seen in corridor 4A. Another disintegration machine is destroyed." Kirk says to him, "You have less than 2 hours, Councilman." And Anan begs him to stop it. And Kirk says, "Stop it, I'm counting on it." And we cut to the Enterprise, lovely shot of the saucer of the Enterprise over the planet. And Scotty signals the planet, and he identifies himself as, "This is the commander of the USS Enterprise. All cities and installations on Amenia 7 have been fed into our fire control system, and in 1 hour and 45 minutes, the entire inhabited surface of your planet will be destroyed. You have that long to surrender your hostages." And Anan is just utterly desperate now. He doesn't know what what he can do. What can I do? And it's at this point that a guard, for some reason, decides to come over and try and comfort Anan in his moment of desperation. And Kirk seizes this opportunity to go all fighty Kirk, and he trips the guard over, and he runs round, and he manages to push one guard into the other two and pinch a weapon and take control of the situation. And he says, hold it, as they try and advance on them, but he's got them covered now with the gun. And it's a really cool scene. And he says, right, now we'll talk. And in an amusing scene, Spock at that moment charges in to rescue Kirk, and he looks confused. Oh, I assumed you needed help. It seems I was in error. And he has a wonderful expression on his face. And Kirk says, no, I need the help, all right. And he opens the computer room and he says to Spock to go in there. And he contacts the Enterprise and he instructs Scotty to maintain position. He says, you can beam us up in 10 minutes if all goes according to plan. But if you don't hear from me in that time, carry out General Order 24 on schedule. Just destroy the entire inhabitants of this planet as instructed. Wow. And then we go have a bit of a Kirk speech here. You've got to love a Kirk speech. And he says, death, destruction, disease, horror. That is what war is all about, Anan. And that's what makes it a thing to be avoided. And you've made it neat and painless. And you've had no reason to stop it. And it's been going on for 500 years. But now I'm going to end it for you. And he ushers everyone out of the room apart from SAR 6. And he instructs Mr. Osborne to cover SAR 6 and bring him into the war room. He says, our communicators and weapons. And he gives them to him. And Spock relays that he's worked out what is going on in this room. These are the attack computers, Captain. This one does this one does that. He explains what they all do. He says, this one's the key. The moment the contact is broken, it abrogates the agreement between the two. SAR 6 looks massively panicked at this as Kirk instructs Osborne to lead him out of the room. He says, what are you going to do? And he says, no, please, as he's ushered out. And Spock says, destroy this one and they'll all go. And Kirk does exactly that. He takes his reclaimed Type 1 phaser out and he fires, destroying the computers. Chain reaction, they all blow. He runs out of the room and he instructs everyone to get against the wall, and they do, and it blows. Big explosions. And Anan walks through, furious at Kirk, and says, do you realize what you have done? And Kirk says, I've given you back the horrors of war. And you'll have to do it all for real now. I've given you a real war, Councilman. If I were you, I'd start making bombs. You can either wage it with real weapons or put an end to it. He says, there can be no peace. Don't you understand? We're a savage warrior species like you. It's inbred in us, like you, your General Order 24. And Kirk then says, yeah, we are killers, but we decide we're not going to kill today. Contact Vendikar. I think you'll find that they're just as terrified. And Foxy does the first useful thing that he's done in this entire episode. He pipes up and says, as a third party interested only in peace and the establishment of normal relations, I should be glad to offer my services as negotiator between you and Vendikar. I have had some small experience in such matters. And Anan relents and says, there may be a chance. We have a direct channel to the Vendikar High Council that hasn't been used in centuries. And Foxy says, well, it must be long overdue then. And Anan gestures to him to go with him, and now they're friends. He's not going to put him into a disintegration machine anymore. Off they go. Anyway, Spock says, there's a chance it may work, Captain. And Kirk agrees. And he calls the Enterprise and says, cancel implementation of General Order 24. Scotty, prepare to beam us up. And we cut to our final scene. Enterprise is in orbit of Amini R7. They're preparing to leave. Lovely shot. And he says, laying a course for Organa 2, Navigator. Never heard of that planet, and I don't think we ever hear of it again. And Hadley nods and plots the course. DePaul sitting next to him. Scotty at the engineering station with Yum and Tamala. And McCoy and Spock are at the rear, and Lieutenant Uhura is there as well. And she pipes up and says, message from E-Mini R7, Captain, in that wonderful way she says it again. And it's Mr. Fox relaying that they are in contact with Vendikar, negotiations in progress, outlook is hopeful. Spock comes down and says, Captain, you took a big chance. And Kirk says, did I, Mr. Spock? They'd been killing 3 million people a year, and it had been going on for 500 years. Real war wouldn't have killed any more people than one of their computer attacks. McCoy then says, but how did you know that it worked? Did you know? He says, no, I didn't know. But still, the Amenians keep a very orderly society, and war is a very, very messy business. And I had a feeling that they would do anything to avoid it. And Spock says, a feeling is not much to go on. And Kirk says, a feeling, Mr. Spock, is all we humans have to go on sometimes. And Spock says, Captain, you almost make me believe in luck. And Kirk, amused, says, Mr. Spock, you almost make me believe in miracles. And Spock looks a bit confused as our episode ends. Lovely shot of the Enterprise leaving orbit of Mini R7, or E-Mini R7, as Uhura would say, directed by Joseph Pevney. We don't need to get into him because he's directed 14 episodes already. We've talked about him a lot. You can see him on IMDb. Great director, done some good episodes. And we get into our end credits with our guest stars, with David Opatoshu as Anan 7. That was quite hard to say. We've got co-starring Gene Lyons as Ambassador Fox, good old Foxy. And we've got featuring the lovely Barbara Babcock as Maya 3, Miko Mayama as Yeoman Tamala, David L. Ross as Galloway, Uhura's there, DePaul's there, Robert Sampson as Star 6, and the music in this episode conducted and composed by Alexander Courage. Let's take a look at some of our cast members. David Opotashu, who played Anan, born 1918, sadly passed away at 78 in the year 1996. Was born in New York City, actor and writer known for Exodus, Torn Curtain, and One Spy Too Many. Next, we've got Gene Lyons, who played Ambassador Fox, born 1921, died 1974, at only the age of 53, which is the age that I am now. And, wow, very, very sad. He was an actor known for Star Trek, known for this one episode. He was known for Ben Casey and Profiles in Courage. Then we have the wonderful, beautiful Barbara Babcock, born in 1937, still with us to this day, and what a career she has had, and often seen as resolute, strong-willed woman. Though born in Kansas, she spent much of her early childhood in Japan and other locations where her father, a U.S. Army major, was posted. He was a noted equestrian as well. So she was all over the world. But she was a very, very, well, she is still a very, very well-known actor. Lots of roles in Star Trek. She would be in fact, I think we have her episodes. Yes, we've got her here as the voice of Trelane's mother in The Squire of Gothos, as Maya 3 in this episode. We've got her in Assignment Earth in Season 2 as the Beta 5 computer and the voice of Isis, who is a cat, as we'll come to know. Season 3, she is the voice of the Tholian, Commander Luskeen, in the Tholian Web. She is Philana, her second on-screen appearance in Plato's Stepchildren, and she is the voice of Zetar in The Lights of Zetar. So lots of appearances by the lovely Barbara Babcock. She was also well known for Hill Street Blues and Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, I believe. And she had a role in Home Alone 4 as well, which I'd seen because I love the Home Alone films. I love 1 and 2, obviously. I think the third one's actually quite underrated as well. The fourth one's awful, but I never made the connection that was her playing that character in that. So that was quite a realization for me. We've then got Miko Mayama, who played Yeoman Tamala, still with us as well, born in 1939, known for I Spy, F Troop, Ironside, Mannix and Hawaii 5-0. And then Robert Sampson, who played Sar 6, born in 1933, died in 2020, not that long ago, known for Reanimator, The Dark Side of the Moon, and Robert Jocks. Robert Jocks, not Robert Fox. Interesting. Let's take a look at our full cast here. Any additional things we haven't seen or noted? We've got David L. Ross there as Galloway, Sean Kenny, some other actors as Amenial Guards, David Armstrong there, Buzz Barbie as the unfortunate aide to Foxy, Majel Barrett credited as the computer voice, which was used in this episode to relay the message from Captain Kirk was fake, a recording. Bobby Bass as an Amenial Guard, John Blower as an Armenian secretary, and Billy Blackburn as Lieutenant Hadley, who was on navigation duty in this episode. Finally, let's give this episode a score. I really do love this episode, although it does have some flaws, and we'll get to that a little bit more in our outro. But it gets an 8 on IMDb, and that's exactly what I'm going to give it to. I think it's got some themes in it that, as a child, I really enjoyed, but as an elder person in later years, I can see things in it that are very dystopian and very concerning and not in line with how the Federation is portrayed. But overall, I do like it. It's got some great things that I enjoy. Scotty is my MVP of the episode, though. I love how he stuck to his guns and would not lower the screens, despite the fact that Foxy was able to beam down anyway. But anyway, there you go. So there you have it, another episode in the bag, A Taste of Armageddon. I really like that one, actually. I think it's certainly got its flaws, for sure, as we covered in the commentary. But overall, very, very solid and very, very enjoyable. And I always do enjoy watching it, indeed. So if you've enjoyed the video, do give me a like. Hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell as you do so, and do leave me a comment as well. Let me know what you think about this episode. Did you agree with my assessment? Are there any things that I missed or anything else that you want to talk about? Your views are always welcome. Take care, stay safe, and travel well, and live well and prosper. Bye for now.